History of modern India. Historiography, the study of historical interpretation. This provides recognition of the intellectual context of history instead of seeing history as a narration of events. So, the modern history of India, for convenience of understanding, can be read broadly under four historiographic approaches. The first one, the colonial approach, or imperialist; next, nationalist, Marxist, and subaltern approach. These are the four approaches, each with its own distinction characters and modes of interpretation. However, there are other approaches also, communalist, Cambridge, liberal, and neo-liberal, and feminist interpretations, which have also influenced historical writings on modern India. Colonial approach. In the 19th century, the colonial school occupied a high position in India. The term colonial approach has been used in two senses. One relate to the history of the colonial countries, while other refers to the works which were influenced by the colonial ideology of dominance. So it is in the second sense that most historians today write about the colonial historiography. In fact, the approach of writing about the colonial countries by the colonial officials was related to the from desire for the dominance and justification of the colonial rule. Hence, in the most such historical works, there was a criticism of indigenous society and cultural. So, as well as simultaneously, there was a prize for the Western culture and values and glorification of the individuals who established the colonial empires. The histories of India written by James Mills, Mount Stuart's Elphinstone, Vincent Smith, and many others pertain examples of the colonial ideology or historiographical trend. The certain characteristics common most of the works of these historians are the following. Orientalist representation of India, the opinion that the British brought unity to India, the notions of social Darwinism, the English considered themselves superior to the natives and the fittest to rule. India viewed a stagnant society which required guidance from the British white man's burden and establishing Pax Britannica to bring law and order peace to be a bickering society. Nationalist approach. The nationalist approach is in Indian history can be described one trend which contributes to the growth of nationalist feelings to unify in the face of religious, caste, linguistic differences or classific classes differentiation in India. This approach looks at a national movement as a movement of the Indian people which grew out of the growing awareness among the people of exploitative nature of colonial rules. This approach developed as a response to confrontation with the colonial approach. It should be noted that the nationalist historians of modern India did not exist before 1947. Before the 1947, nationalist historiography mainly dealt with the ancient and medieval period of Indian history. However, in the last quarter of the 19th century, a detailed scientific critique of colonialism for the adverse economic aspects of alien rule was developed by the nationalists like Dadabhai Naoroji, M.G. Rande, G.V. Joshi, R.C. Dutt, K.T. Tilang, G.K. Gokhale, D. Vacha. So, Sakaram Ganesh Duskar, a close associate of Sri Aurobindo, popularized the ideology of Nairoji and Rande in his Deshar Katha, published in 1904 in Bengali. The only accounts of the nationalist movement was by nationalist readers, not historians, such as R.C. Pradhan, A.C. Majumdar, J.L. Nehru, Patabi Sitaramaya, R.C. Majumdar, Tara Chand. These are the noted nationalist historians of the modern India. Marxist approach. In the beginning of the Marxist approach in India was heralded by two classic books, Ranji Palam Dutt's India's Today and A.R. Desai's social background of Indian nationalism. originally written for famous left book club in England, India today. Uh, the first published in 1940 in England was later published in India in 1947. So here this is social background of nationalism was first published in India in 1948. So unlike the imperialist colonial approach, the Marxist historians clearly see the prime contradictions between the interest of the colonial masters and the subject of the people, as well as the process of the nation in the beginning, in the nation in the making. So unlike the nationalists, they also take a full note of inner contradictions between the different sections of the people to Indian society. However, some of them, particularly Rajni, Palim, that were unable to fully integrate the treatment of the primary anti-imperialist contradictions and the secondary inner contradictions, and tended to counterbalance the anti-imperialist struggle with the classes or social struggle. They tend to see the national movement as a structured bourgeois movement, if not the bourgeois movement, and miss its open and all class character. Another noted person, Marxist historian, who made a critique of R.P. Dutt's paradigm is Sumit Sarkar. He considered Dutt's paradigm as a simplistic version of Marxist class approach. He looks at the nationalist leaders in the light of intelligentsia, which act as a kind of proxy for as a passive social forces which it had detailed organic connections. A.R. Desai traces the growth of national movement in five phases, each phase based on the particular social classes which supported and sustained it. And finally, subaltern approach. This school of thought began in the early 1980s under the editorship of Ranjit Guha as a critic of the existing historiography, which was faulted for ignoring the voice of people. Right from the beginning, the subaltern historiography took the position that the entire tradition of Indian historiography had and elitist biases. For the subaltern historians, the basic contradiction in Indian society in the colonial epoch was between elite and both Indian and foreign. On the one hand, the subaltern group, on the other hand, not between the colonialism and Indian people. However, they do not subscribe to the Marxist theory of nature of the exploitation by the nationalist movement. So they point out that the Indian society of the time could not be seen in terms of class alone, as a capitalism in the country was nascent at this time. This school sees nationalism as exploitative in the terms of caste, gender, religious, creed divisions. Nationalism says a subaltern ignored internal contradictions within the society as well as what the marginalized representation had to say. They believe that the Indian people were never united in a common anti-imperialist struggle, that there was no such entity as Indian national movement. Instead, they asserted there were two distinctive movements or streams: the real anti-imperialist stream of the subaltern and the bogus national movement of the elite. So the elite streams, led by the official leadership of Indian National Congress, were the little more than a clock for the struggle for power among the elite. These are the main approaches and communalist approach. Historians of the school, relying completely on the colonial historiography of the medieval India and colonial era textbooks, viewed Hindus Muslims as a permanent hostile groups whose interests were mutually different and antagonistic to each other. So this view was not only reflected in writings of the historians, but also took a more virulent form in the hands of communal political leaders. In their view, India's medieval history was one long story of Hindu-Muslim conflict. So, as a corollary, this view, it was argued that the 19th to 20th century Muslim had the happy and proud, ever-present memory of being a ruling class. So Cambridge School emphasizes the Indian nationalism as a product of conflict among the Indians themselves, forgetting the benefits from the British rulers. So for them, Indian nationalist leaders were inspired by the greedy of the power and material benefits. Liberal and neoliberal interpretations implies that the economic exploitation of the colonies was not beneficial to the Britain as it delayed the development of the new industries in Britain. So feminist historiography focuses on areas of research and analyze colonial structures such as the legal structure which affected women's lives. It also focuses on women's vulnerability due to the denial of ownership of the productive resource.